I haven't even pressed the start recording button. As I said, hopefully, there will be more people joining us in the next 5 to 10 minutes. But it's 1 hour class today, so shouldn't come in too late. All right, so in the last class, we were looking at the structure of the income statement, and basically two major components, income and expenses, right? So we basically looked at these two major sources of income and expenses. So each component, right? Income consists of two components, or of which the revenue is the primary component, primary source of income, right? We all know. Secondary source of income is something like investment income, rental income, right? Copyrights, etc. I mean, as a company may have, copyrights and royalty. I mean, if a company has patents, if the company have patents, then they have royalty, license fee, and things like that. Those are considered passive income. And then expenses also come from two major sources or major components, direct cost and indirect cost. Talked about also what is direct cost. That's it's called direct cost because it's the cost of the factors of production, right? Factors of production, capital, labor, and raw material. The factors of production which go directly into the production of the product. So it's that's why it's called direct cost. And direct cost is also called cost of goods sold, and also called total variable cost. And I told you total variable cost is the microeconomics terminology. CGS, cost of goods sold, is the accounting's terminology. But the total variable cost means basically it changes, it varies. Think about the word variable. That means it varies. It varies with what? It varies with the output level. The quantity produced means basically output level or production level, right? So it goes up or down with the production level. It goes up or down. The more you produce, you use more inputs, right? Raw material, you use more labor, you use more capital, use more raw material. So it goes up because the unit production cost, because if unit production cost is $300, right? And then if you produce, as the quantity produced or the production level goes up, then total will go up, right? And as the quantity goes down, total will go down. Therefore, it all depends on quantity produced, right? It's a function of quantity, you can also say. Just like also what? Revenue is also the function of quantity. As quantity goes up, right? Revenue goes up. As quantity goes down, revenue goes down. And the unit cost, another name for unit cost, is average variable cost, because total divided by quantity will be average. And if you divide total by quantity, then you should arrive at unit cost, right? So unit cost is the average variable cost, right? Another thing is, I've been telling you, I don't know if I told you this or not last time, CGS, cost of goods sold, is exactly the like the cost side of the revenue, cost side of the revenue, right? Think about it. I used Dell as an example, Dell and Best Buy, and Dell is the manufacturer and Best Buy is the retailer. So Dell makes computers, and we'll assume uh, Dell Dell's production cost, in other words, cost per unit. Of course, Dell's cost will have to include not only uh, CGS direct cost, but also indirect cost. So let's say Dell's direct cost alone is $200, and the indirect cost, let's say indirect cost is $100. So then $300, right? So that's the price, that's the cost uh, from Dell. It's not only the production cost, but not only the direct cost, but indirect cost altogether, right? $300, and that's the price that they are selling. Uh, they sell they sell this to Best Buy for uh, $400, let's say, because their cost is 300, and then they will have to add their own profit margin, right? So they sell it to Best Buy for $400, and then uh, that means for Best Buy, $400 is their cost. Isn't that right? $400 is their cost for Best Buy. $500 is their price, right? So once again, for Dell, right? Let me write it somewhere else. So for Dell, this is 200, direct cost 200, indirect cost 100, and then they have to add their own profit margin. Dell's profit margin, right? I would say margin. Okay, let's just make it simple. This is not just the indirect cost, but the entire overhead. Often, a lot of people confuse overhead with indirect cost, but overhead is more than indirect cost. Overhead is actually operating expenses plus taxes, tax. Plus profit margin, right? That's overhead. So let's say $100 is overhead, including OPEX and everything. So then that's Dell's price when they sell it to Best Buy. So this is Best Buy's cost, isn't that right? This is Best Buy's cost. And then when they sell it for, and then they add their own profit margin or their own overhead, right? let's say they add overhead on the margin of 200. So Best Buy sells it for 500, right? Then think about it. 300 is, so in this example, um, 300 is Best Buy's cost, right? So if they sell, okay, quantity, right? And then let's say they sell 1,000 units. I'll put it quantity 1,000 units. 1,000 units. Then think about it. Best Buy's CGS, okay, dollar, okay. In dollars, right? If they sell 1,000 units, their cost is $300,000. Isn't that right? And their revenue will be $500,000, 500K. Right? Make sense? And this is called, this is called CGS. And this is called revenue. Right? Make sense? Any questions so far? Any questions? For Best Buy, right? Best Buys. And then if you think about it, then cost of goods sold and revenue are two sides of the same coin. They're simply the two sides of the same coin, right? Cost of goods sold is the cost side of the revenue, right? Cost side of the revenue. Revenue is the price side of the cost. Revenue is the price side of the CGS. Make sense? Are you guys there? I see 9 people only. 9 people. So that's why sometimes cost of goods sold is also called cost of revenue. I mean, they go by also cost of revenue. And that makes sense. I told you. I just explained to you. CGS is the cost side of the revenue, right? Revenue is the price side of the CGS, right? Two sides of the same coin, right? So this is something you at least that should help you to get the structural view of this. So that explains a lot about the relationship between revenue and cost. And also now indirect cost, I've been telling you, indirect cost is also called OPEX, operating expenses, or sometimes operating cost. Operating expenses, and this is accounting's terminology. But in microeconomics is called total fixed cost. And I said OPEX and total fixed cost are roughly equivalent, right? Look at the sign. It's not equal sign. It's, two waves, that's, approximately equal to, not exactly equal to, right? Approximately. Why? It's because total fixed cost in microeconomics, they focus more on the initial investment. And I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to come back to this quick later. So once all of these are, detailed out, income detailed out, expenses detailed out, and what happens next? What happens next is, of course, you have to subtract, right? Subtraction must happen next, right? Isn't that right? Subtraction must happen next. And once expenses are subtracted from income, it can be considered roughly as profit, right? But it's not exactly net profit just yet. At this point, it is called operating income or operating profit. Operating income or operating profit. And here, you might wonder, oh, isn't pi the sign of inflation? Yes, it's the symbol for inflation in macroeconomics, right? In macroeconomics context, it is a symbol of inflation, but in microeconomics context, it is the symbol for profit. Okay, so operating income, right, or operating profit. So that means this is not net profit just yet. And the when we say right, operating profit is also called, another name is EBIT. Okay, EBIT. Anyone familiar with the term EBIT? Anyone? Does anyone know what EBIT stands for? Where is everybody? I see 9 people. Nobody's. Are you there? Are you guys there?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, Papa.
Zechariah and Eric. So does anyone know what it stands for? Anyone? Anyone knows what EBIT stands for? Okay, that's fine. Now, the name, why isn't it? Okay. Now, actually, it's, EBIT stands for earnings before interest and taxes. EBIT stands for earnings before interest and taxes. So then it's that kind of name. It's an acronym, but not just the acronym. I'm talking about the logic in that name. The logic, from the logic in the name, it becomes very clear what should happen next. Isn't it right? This is because it stands for earnings before interest and taxes. You can say you can conclude 2 things from this. You can conclude 2 things. One, earnings That's another name for profit. Earnings mean that's the same thing as profit. Okay, and I've been telling you I don't like to use the term income here. Okay, although it's in accounting, it's accepted. I mean, it's totally accepted in accounting, but I don't like to repeat the term income here. That sounds like, because we have income here too, right? We have income, and this is gross income, gross, right? But think about it. Once you subtract or net out the expenses, then there's no way, it becomes profit. It should be called profit. I mean, if you call that income, it's like almost like, this gets used, this is used interchangeably, right? The term income is, if the term income is used interchangeably, then this can mean gross income. I mean, does that, but by the structure, right? By the flow of the logic, it's not gross income. But then this income, can we replace that with the term profit here? Huh? No way. This cannot be replaced by the term profit, because that's gross state. It's gross income. It cannot be replaced by the term profit. Okay. Therefore, repeating the term income, it's not right. It's not. But in accounting, they use it, and I will explain to you a little later why in accounting they continue to use the term income repeatedly over and over, because eventually you have to arrive at net profit, and even the net profit in accounting, they call it net income. And I find it totally, inappropriate to call it income from this stage, right? Now, so one thing we can deduce from this nomenclature, right? Because I'm gonna continue to have two columns for each line item, because they go by different names. And this column, the right column, it's very logical and self-revealing and self-predicting, self-explanatory and self-predicting. So I like the right column, the naming in the right column, right? Okay, following this right column, I prefer the nomenclature in the right column. Now, second thing you can tell is it's earnings before interest and taxes. So, what do you think? It tells already. It tells already what's gonna come next. What do you think is gonna come next? Anyone? What should come next? Nobody's nobody's engaged in the nobody's engaged in the class today, huh? Anyone? Okay, nobody. Well, if nobody says anything, nobody answers the question, nobody gets any extra point. Well, look, logically, the next is earnings before interest and taxes. So what should come next? Interest. This is earnings. It says earnings before interest and taxes. So it's self-prophecy. It's making a self-prophecy. What comes next? Interest must come next, right?
Yes.
Too late. Okay. you don't get any point for just uh, have it's called interest payment or interest expense. It doesn't matter whatever you call it, interest payment or interest expense. But first of all, why do you have interest? Why do you have interest? Now think about it. This is we're talking about Dell, right? We're talking about computer manufacturer Dell, and any manufacturing, right? What is the most obvious? What is the most salient, most obvious characteristics of manufacturing that distinguish manufacturing from retail or service industry? Hmm? What is the most salient feature of manufacturing? Anyone? Well, by definition, manufacturing must have plant and equipment, isn't it right? Manufacturing must have a factory, isn't it right? Hmm? That's the main characteristics of manufacturing. There's no manufacturing without factory, right? And then think about it. So plant and equipment. Now think about it. Plant and equipment for computer manufacturing. How much do you think it will cost to build a computer manufacturing plant? Hmm? Any guess? Any guesstimate?
A year?
What?
1 year?
No. I didn't ask how long. I didn't ask how long. How much do you think it will cost? How much do you think it will cost to build a computer manufacturing plant?
It'd probably cost like 1 million.
Only 1 million? Even a good a good home is 1 million. I mean, uh, it would cost. You don't seem to have the concept of what 1 million is. 1 million um, in New York City, not necessarily in Manhattan, but if you go to like even Queens, right, Bayside, or to buy a decent house, it would cost something like 2 million. A decent house. Uh, in New Jersey, to buy a like suburban New Jersey, good neighborhoods. You think New York is more expensive? Yeah, New York is more expensive. But for paying in Manhattan, if you pay $2 million, what kind of what kind of apartment do you get? What kind of condo? It's not really that fancy, right? It's just an old building, no elevator, 5-story, walk up in East Side, Upper East Side. Uh, but Bergen County, New Jersey, neighborhoods like towns like Inglewood Cliffs, uh, uh, very clean. First of all, very clean, very nice. Compared to Manhattan or Bronx, Queens, generally very dingy, right? Not very clean, dingy, and Chinatown, lower East Side, very dingy, and of course mostly rental buildings, but uh, $2 million $3 million will buy you a nice house with backyard and front yard, clean neighborhood, safe and clean neighborhood. Um, So a that's the price of a home. Computer manufacturing plant, it would cost at least $100 million at least $100 million, right? So and then how do you know 100 so just to build, think about it, just to build a plant, it would cost about $100 million. And of course it won't be done overnight. To build a plant, it would take at least something like a year and a half, or 2 years. So that you don't get any revenue. There's no, because the plant is not there yet. It's not finished, and the plant must be in place, right, before you can start the production. So for the whole 1 year or 2 years, you have uh, no income, no revenue, but just the expense. You have already incurred the expense. What expense? The initial investment. In other words, $100 million was expensed at time zero already. That initial investment, where does it come from? Uh, where do you get $100 million from? Uh, so in most cases, you would have, if you were Michael Dell, the founder, and just like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, Michael Dell, um, you just had a guy. You were just a guy. You are just a guy with technology and an idea. You could build a computer. You could assemble a computer, but you didn't have capital. So they all started from their father's garage. Okay, they Bill Gates started to build, manually assemble computers from his father's garage. So did Steve Jobs. So did Michael Dell. And then once they were, through through chains like Radio Shack, their computers got sold, and et cetera, et cetera. Um, and the venture capital spotted them. They were spotted by the venture capital. So venture capital offered uh, venture capital offered uh, uh, investment, and that's equity. Basically when venture capitals invest. So in this case, let's say Dell, right? At first, venture capital approached Michael Dell. Uh, so how about if we invest $5 million in your business? And Michael Dell, any of these guys would have gladly accepted, because capital is what they didn't have. Capital is what they need, desperately. And then nobody is, willing to. There's no way they can raise capital. First of all, um, if they go to the bank, will the bank give them any loan? No, bank won't give them any loan, right? Because why? Because there's no track record. And first of all, it's a big question mark, right? In those days, in 1970s, 1980s, it was a totally different world. A computer manufacturing, building personal computers, that was a big question mark. And bank would never take the risk of investing in a question mark. They will only lend money only if you put up collateral. If you put up collateral, then so think about it. To borrow $100 million from the bank, this is just unthinkable, unrealistic, unless you put up a collateral of worth $100 million. But how can a young guy, 20 something, just starting up from his father's garage, how can he put up a collateral like that? There's no way. So obviously uh, in reality, right, you cannot get a loan, and you cannot sell stocks or bonds. First of all, you cannot be accepted into the stock market or bond market, right? You have no track record. You don't qualify. So the venture capital is the only way. So that's why they are called angels. They just appear one day like angels and uh, uh, discuss investing 5 million. Even if venture capital provided 5 million, that's not enough. Still, you need $95 million to build a plant like that. Of course, early on, they wouldn't. Their plant was not, the size of the size that would be, that would require $100 million. They probably started out with like a $10 million plant. Now think about it. The size of the plant is determined by the size of the capital. Isn't that right? If you invest $10 million, you can build a plant that $10 million can build, and the plant worth $10 million. In other words, the plant that $10 million built has production capacity limit, right? Because it will be the size of the plant that only $10 million can build. So that size is also reflected in the size is reflected in the output capacity, the production capacity. Does that make sense? A $10 million plant, which means a plant that was built by $10 million capital, inevitably has the production capacity limit, right? On the other hand, $100 million plant, the plant that was built by $100 million capital, will have 10 times the size of the $10 million plant. Does that make sense? And so $100 million plant, the production capacity of $100 million plant will be roughly 10 times the production capacity of the $10 million plant, right? That's why the size of the capital determines the size of the plant. The size of the plant determines the production capacity, and the production capacity also determines the potential revenue, and also the potential revenue determines the market share, right? So let's say somehow, so Michael Dell was able to, let's say, raise $100 million. Some of it venture capital, some of it from the bank. I mean, although bank loan is impossible for a startup, let's say Michael Dell started with a $10 million plant, right? And then, so that means 5 million was from the venture capital, and 5 million, let's say, he somehow succeeded in securing the loan from the bank. Well, the 5 million that the venture capital provided, he could probably use it as collateral and raise another 5 million from the bank. Then, so 10 million, he started out with $10 million. And as the business boomed, then, as his business thrived, then he gained more market share, and, he needed to expand. And, as the revenue increased, profit increased, and the bank would be willing to give more loan, and etc. So eventually, let's say the plant is, plant size is something that $100 million could build. That's initial investment. okay, that initial investment, it doesn't change. Initial investment doesn't change. Think about it. At time zero, you had to spend $100 million, right, to hire a construction firm and to build a plant, and then after the plant is finished, then you have to install the production equipment in the plant, right? So that, let's say that's total of $100 million. And when everything is in place, plant is built, and all the production equipment is in place, then you can start the production. Okay, so $100 million doesn't change. It's a constant. That's why it's called fixed cost. And why am I? It's fixed, and in the sense that it doesn't change with the production level. Okay. So with this $100 million plant, it must have, a maximum production capacity. Maximum production capacity is like, 1 million computers per year. Let's say 1 million computers per year. But, actual production level can be anywhere between 0 and 1 million, right? So if the variable cost will vary depending on the production level, but the initial investment was already expensed. It was already expended, right? It was already incurred. It was already spent. It doesn't change with the production level. And in that sense, it's called fixed cost. That's why it is called fixed cost, total fixed cost, meaning it doesn't change with the production level. It doesn't change with quantity. Hence, it's called also sunk cost, right? Because it's sunk. This $100 million is already sunk into this business, sunk into this project. And then once it is sunk, then there is no turning back, right? Once the initial investment is made, there's no turning back. You have to keep going. You have to complete the, this project construction. You must complete this plant and start production and sell. That's the only way you can recover your initial investment. Isn't that right? Once the initial investment is made, you cannot turn back and walk away, because then, that $100 million is completely wasted. You will lose that $100 million, and then you still owe the bank $100 million, or, whatever, $95 million or whatever. Obviously, it doesn't make any sense. No, and it will be very stupid of you if you walk away. You can say no at this point, right? There's only one direction you can go, forward, right? You have to produce and sell and recoup this initial investment. And it cannot happen overnight. It's going to take many years. It's going to take many years, right, to recoup this. Not only the initial investment, but also you need to recoup the cost, CGS, and administrative, all operating expenses up to that point until you break even. Okay, so here's the thing. So total fixed cost is the microeconomics terminology. And in microeconomics, they focus more on the initial investment. But in accounting, that initial investment is, of course, is spread over a long time horizon. I mean, you invested $100 million. It cannot be recovered overnight. It will have to be recovered over a long time horizon. So all of that is spread over a long time horizon, right? And that time horizon, that point, at some point it will happen, that break even will happen. And after that break even, I mean, until that break even, the initial investment is all spread over the long time horizon. And in accounting, they are focusing more on that. Also, they focus on the initial, but it's spread over. And then what they are focusing more on is something like day-to-day operating expenses that don't change with the quantity. In other words, in accounting, they focus more on something like rent. Now think about it. Rent, suppose you are running a coffee shop. We're almost running out of time. Suppose you're running a coffee shop. You can tell, you can break down your cost into CGS and operating expenses. What is CGS? CGS would include the capital equipment you use. In other words, machinery, a coffee machine, right? Coffee machine. And also coffee bean, the raw material, coffee bean, water, and the wages for the barista. And they can be all, that's direct cost, isn't that right? If you're running a coffee shop. So your CGS depends on how many cups of coffee you sell, right? Some months you would have a very good business. You will sell you sell probably 50,000 cups of coffee. But in a bad month, you may sell only like not even 500 cups of coffee, right? So the variable cost, in other words, CGS goes up and down, right, depending on quantity. But the rent, you must be renting that space. Rent doesn't depend on how many cups you sell. Even during the good month or bad month, the rent is still the same. So it's fixed, right? And also the salary for clerical staff, like secretaries, it doesn't change with the production. So we're out of time, so we're gonna talk more about this. We'll continue in the next class. Okay, in the next class. So any questions so far? Any questions? Someone was trying to say something. Who was that? Was that a question? Now, if it was, even if it is a question.
No, that was me, Professor.
Okay. If you don't have any questions, we'll call it a day here. And if any questions, then you can ask in the next class or use the my office hour. Yeah, Jalen, you have a question?
Yeah,
Jalen?
I just wanted to confirm. You said EBIT is earnings before interest and taxes, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Earnings before interest and taxes. All right. All righty. So I will see you guys next Tuesday. Okay. Have a great afternoon and take care. Okay.
Have a
I'll
nice
stop
one,
sharing.
Have a good one, Professor.
All right. All right. Take care, everyone. All right. Then I'll stop recording and sign out.